Hello, and welcome to Book Circle. I'm Earl Weinberg. This time we will continue our reading of Aunt Jenny and the Delayed Quest by Jim Burrows. Aunt Jenny and her companions are off across a lake to the Shattered Isle, there to reclaim a blessed or enchanted sword. Her companions include a king and the ghost of his queen. Chapter 10, The Shattered Isle. The Rook was a smaller vessel than the Osprey, but larger than the skiff. It sported a mainsail, a jib, and a cabin that could sleep four, the king and queen, Sasha, and Aunt Jenny. Three, and the young man who had piloted the skiff, his name they discovered was Timmins, would have to sleep on deck. The king took the wheel and captained, with three on lookout and Sasha and Timmins acting as crew. With Vivian serving as occasional navigator, Aunt Jenny had little to do but her knitting, writing in her commonplace book, and watching the Queen. They made good time sailing down the Blackwater, stopping briefly in Blackfish for additional supplies, salted meat, fresh fruit, and yarn for Aunt Jenny. The sun, an actual glimpse of sun, poked out from behind the clouds at high noon, just as they passed into the Great Lake. For once, the broad brim on Aunt Jenny's straw hat earned its pay, keeping the sunlight out of her eyes. The trip to the Shattered Isle was, on the whole, uneventful. The weather and lake were calm, and the skies clear. Periodically, they spotted large, dark shapes in the water around them, occasionally shadowing them for several minutes. But the giant beasts never broke the surface nor threatened them. Still, they made Aunt Jenny nervous, at least. The sleeping arrangements and the need to always keep the Queen within the gaze of the king's eye generated a goodly amount of disquiet and dissatisfaction. Jenny did her best to ignore such things, lest her thoughts help shape reality. As they got closer to the island, the question of how they could retrieve the third sword became a constant concern and topic of conversation. The poison from the Black Heart ultimately led to my death, Vivian explained, not for the first time. It was so thick around the heart, which is nearly atop the sword, that I was disabled before I could fetch it. Of course, I was more seriously exposed to it for having to find the sword and recognize the danger of the poison. Knowing that much will help, but will it be enough? And, too, I was no mere mortal. I had seen a great many centuries when I first met Merlin, a millennium and a half ago. Knowing of it now, Aunt Jenny posed, and formulating magic to counteract it, can you quantify, say for certain, how much advantage that would give us? There are breathing spells that wrap one's whole being in a bubble of air. They would hold the poison away from one's skin, and poisoned touch is what was my bane. But there are vapors above the waters there, and they sickened others rapidly. If they are present in the bubble, then there will be more risk. Is there a spell or substance that can keep the skin dry while under water? Asked Sasha. Both, though I know not where to get the substance. All right, then. Would it be possible to first cast the dryness spell upon one of us, then the bubble on top of that? That'd give us two barriers. Aye, lass, and both of unknown potency against this poison, of which we know so little, but that it brought my death. Yeah. So, summarized Aunt Jenny, we have a choice of unknown degrees of protection against the poison, and solving the problem of the already dead queen being able to lift the sword. After a while she added, or trying to do both, protect the eye-bearer and the queen, since we don't know how the magical poison will affect her. An ordinary poison cannot harm the dead, but magic, aye, such a course would double the risk, but also double the abilities we bring. I like it not, but unless we find a way to grant me full agency, I see no other road. Vivian nodded. So, said Sasha, protect both you, Aunt Jenny, and her late majesty, so that you can keep her in the gaze of the king's eye and she can receive the sword. Yes, and also protect all who remain here on the ship against the vapors rising off the lake, answered Jenny. Aunt Jenny? Yes, Sasha? Do we actually know that only you can activate the eye? No, my dear, we do not. That's a very good point. It's good to see that at least one of us understands the value of scientific empiricism. Vivian, with your permission, I think we should see if I'm essential to the process. Certainly. Go ahead with your inquiry. Sasha, would you help me remove the choker? They did so, and testing with Sasha, Vrayan, and 3 twice, once before he saw everyone else succeed, and once after, they established that any of them could activate the amulet and maintain Vivian's solidity. Over the next few hours, Aunt Jenny knitted each of them a simple version of a doctor's mask that could be tied on to cover their mouth and nose. Vivian enchanted them to create a breathing bubble when worn. They also produced wristbands bearing the dryness spell. While they were still a half hour from the place just off the shore of the Shattered Isle, where Vivian knew the sword to lie, she spoke to Aunt Jenny. "'Twould seem to me that there was one you did not test in your experiment, myself. Perhaps no other need risk proximity to the heart and the full strength of its poison. You're right, I'd not thought of that. Shall we then? Yes." They did so, and established that, in fact, with the eye worn around her throat, Vivian retained her solidity. "Look! Sky! Water! They come!" called 3. There, very nearly directly astern of them, winter by duskward, what Aunt Jenny continued to think of as northwest, they could see a small sailing vessel headed their way, and to the summer by duskward, southwest, there were 3 flying creatures. The flyers looked very much like dragons, though they were far enough away that it was hard to tell either how far or how large they were. "Great," spat Sasha. "How far are we from the sword? Will either of them get to us before we reach it? Which? Oh, She looked at Aunt Jenny. "I'll be quiet now and save you chastising me for my language." She smiled. "Well, it wouldn't be entirely uncalled for." Sasha laughed a bit. "I just thought, you have a lot in common with Captain America, a hero born decades ago who makes me watch my language." "Thank you, I think. But back to the—" She squinted, staring at the flyers, then sighed. "Dragons, I'm afraid." "That could be my skiff behind us, or its like, suggested Vrayan. "If so, she's moving at top speed, or more." "Vivian," asked Aunt Jenny, "where are we actually going?" "That, ahead of us, that's the Shattered Isle. 'Tis that far, but near directly ahead, not angled off." If the dragons in the boat are trying to catch up with us, it looks like we'll all arrive at about the same time. The dragons could probably head us off if they were headed straight to the intersection, rather than always flying toward us. Damn. Sasha murmured, "Language," and smirked. "We'll have to assume the dragons are out to stop us from getting the sword, or just stop us altogether." "The boat," Aunt Jenny shrugged, "it could be on either side. We can hope it's an ally from the Wolfdales, but we'd best not count on it." After a pause, she added, "Do dragons swim? Are they likely to dive after us to get the sword?" "'Tis unlikely," opined the Queen. "Then I suppose you should go after the sword alone and leave the rest of us to deal with the hostiles." "Mayhap. For now, mayhap, I can speed us on our way." And with that, she stepped to the prow, where the spray splashed upon her, raised her arms as if to embrace the sky, looked up, and murmured quietly in a sing-song voice. After a minute or two, the Rook gained speed, as waves themselves seemed to aid the boat upon her way. The Queen stood that way for several minutes before slumping in near collapse. Turning, she said, "E'en with the aid of the eye, the dead can wield very little true power. I must rest before we arrive at the sword." She made her way slowly below decks to lie down. Vrayan looked back over his shoulders at the pursuing vessel and the approaching dragons. "We'll not have much time between arriving at our destination being put upon. Timmins, go below and find a marker buoy. We may needs overpass the sword upon our first approach. and the Queen dives while we are under sail, we must needs mark the spot. Aye, sir. Aye, sire. The king grunted at the royal appellation, but allowed it. Vivian had not rested long when she returned to the deck. We are less than half a league from our goal. 'Tis time we made our final preparations. Looking skyward, she frowned. You'll have but minutes before they catch us. We dare not slow much before we arrive. I must dive while we are under sail. Vrayan spoke up. 'Tis clear now that the vessel that pursues us is mine own skiff. I cannot see who mans her yet. We must hope it is an ally. I am fair certain 'tis at least one fay, my love. I feel the power they add to the sail, e'en from here. Aye, she's a fine little vessel, but should not be gaining on us so without. Morwenna, perhaps, suggested Sasha. I know her not, lass, said the queen, but 'tis not unlikely so. And it is, and you can hold the dragons off for her arrival, we may yet see a good end. Now, all, don your masks and bands, for the vapors begin to rise. After putting on her own, she pulled a second small knit bundle from her pouch and handed it to Sasha. You and Aunt Jenny should have the spares, against the chance 'tis her indeed. 'Twould not do to have her come to our aid only to be felled by the heart. Now, to our stations all. The queen walked to the rail, followed by Timmins, who was carrying the buoy. Aunt Jenny walked to the stern. We're near upon it, called the queen. I can feel it. Close. Closer. Here. And she dove over the rail. Timmins, running aft, tossed the buoy, its anchor, and the line that connected them into the center of the ripples that marked her entry point. Mr. Timmins, 3, prepare to bring us about, called the king, and they scrambled to the lines. He nodded, marking time, and then gave the order, come about. Aunt Jenny tore her attention away from the maneuvers. She and Sasha, equipped with hunting bows and quivers that they'd retrieved from the ship's stores, were to focus on the oncoming dragons. With a glance at the lifeboat, where her bag was slung and Rudy leashed, she turned to face the dragons and unslung the bow and readied an arrow, uncomfortable with the thought that her experience at school, decades before, qualified her as one of the ship's most experienced archers. The dragons were close and closing. They'd be here soon. She inhaled deeply. 3, during a brief moment of inactivity, appeared at her side. Wish me luck, 3, she said, hoping she sounded confident and determined. You do it. 3, trust you. He touched her elbow and then scampered off in response to the king's next call. She walked a few paces along the rail, staying at the point closest to the dragons as the ship turned its course. She hefted the bow in her hand. It had a heavier draw than any she'd ever shot in competition, and she certainly was no stronger than. Her instructor, a Turkish gentleman with an interest in archery's history, had taught her a few things about how warriors and hunters had shot in the days before compound bows with counterweights and all the falderall of modern archery. She shrugged her shoulders and strove to relax. The first dragon would be in range soon. She fixed her grip and pulled lightly on the string, trying to get the feel. A few feet away, Sasha did the same. Skathach had included archery in the many weeks of her training that took place during the days that Jenny had traveled with Asheta. Oh, what Asheta wouldn't give to have the Silver Huntress, the slayer of monsters, with her now. But here they were. The lead dragon came into range of her bow. She waited. Sasha drew and loosed an arrow. Aunt Jenny waited, and then, when she felt that not only would the arrow reach far enough, but she could be accurate enough, she began to shoot, imitating the best form that Mr. Selleck had taught her all those years ago, pushing the bow away from her rather than pulling the string, upward at first and then lowering to point at the target. The first shot went high. She could hear Mr. Selleck admonish her not to loose too soon in that soft Turkish voice. She fired again and again, her shots often missing or glancing off. Finally one and then a second struck home, lodging between 2 belly plates. The dragon swooped down at her. She let the bow drop and drew her sword. The giant talons snapped at her, but missed as she pinked it and dodged to the side. He came around for a second swoop, and this time the talon bore down hard, straight at her. She lunged and drove her rapier home, but the talon kept coming, sliding down her blade, and when it reached the guard, driving her back. She clutched the hilt with both hands as she fell backwards under the onslaught, landing hard on the deck. The dragon bellowed as its other feet landed on the deck. It pressed down, crushing her. Time seemed to grind to a near halt as her arms were forced back. Suddenly the dragon screamed as one, then a second arrow caught it in the joint where the attacking leg met its body. There was a large thump and then a smaller one, and Morwenna was rolling across the deck. The dragon launched, collapsing Aunt Jenny's arms and then jerking up. She was pulled roughly upward and hung suspended in the air only to fall to the deck as the sword pulled loose from the dragon's paw. Morwenna stood over her, loosing arrows. Her head swam. She ached all over. No, not true. There were places so battered they were numb. She struggled to her feet and shook her head, hoping to clear it. The buoy caught her eye. It bobbed once or twice, but then both Sasha and Morwenna whooped triumphantly. She turned her head and saw a dragon tumbling through the sky, falling toward... She watched in horror as it crashed into the mast and the mainsail. The ship bucked and threw her. She slammed into the rail. The buoy, something about the buoy. Water splashed, wood screamed and cracked. Morwenna knelt by her side. Aunt Jenny, she interrupted Morwenna, pulling the mask from her pocket. Put this on, over your nose and mouth. What? No questions, wear it. As Morwenna tied on the mask, Jenny continued, and this around your wrist, magic. Morwenna obeyed, then from a kneeling position started shooting again. Another dragon was stooping on them. The buoy, it was bobbing. Vivian was pulling on its line, pulling herself up. The ship was broken and drifting away. Aunt Jenny managed to stand. Over the rail she could see the skiff a few feet away. She sheathed her sword and leapt over the rail, or clambered and fell into the skiff. It's more like it. She pulled free an oar from under the gunwale and pushed off from the rook. 3 landed lightly beside her. Take an oar, she ordered, as she unlimbered and set an oarlock. He followed suit, and soon they were pulling toward the buoy. Her arms and back, her whole body, rebelled at every stroke. They found a beat and began making their way to the buoy. Behind them the battle raged. Dragons screeched, wood creaked and groaned, snapped explosively. Beat, beat, beat. And then, with a thump, the buoy glanced off the bow and clattered along the side. She back-paddled, then stowed the oar. She grabbed the buoy with hands that seemed to burn. It jerked. Then again, rhythmically. Behind her, 3 was nattering something. She couldn't make it out. Clutching the buoy, anchoring the skiff, it became her world. Suddenly, a hilt, a hand, a sheathed sword appeared out of the water. She snatched at them, hand and sword, but managed to grab only the sword. Vivian's face and head broke through the water. She smiled, maskless, and sank below the surface. 3 nattered. Jenny clutched the sword to her like a baby, never let it go. Mask, he was saying, mask! Where was hers? Hanging useless around her neck. The stench. Darkness closed in. Nothing ached anymore. His face was dark, like chocolate, warm cocoa on a winter's day, teeth like snow, a smile to melt your heart, his deep, rich, low voice soothing, no matter that the words were unintelligible, just the voice, the warmth of it. She could sleep in like this, warm and comfortable forever. Dr. Tom, she murmured. Nurse Jenny. Then, time to wake. Don't wanna. The sun is shining, the little birdies are singing. He coaxed her as he always had when she wanted to sleep in for just a little longer. Oh, do I have to? She whined. Yes, things to be, places to do. He looked so good and young and alive, and something wasn't right. "Nurse Jenny," he coaxed. "Aunt Jenny." His voice thinned and rose. His face was wrong. Pale, pale cream, not cocoa. "Aunt Jenny," she said softly, coaxing. "Sasha!" She was awake with a start, opened her eyes. The pale face remained, framed in auburn locks. "Sasha." She nodded and closed her eyes to go back to sleep. "No, stay with me. Wake up, please." "Oh, all right," she conceded and opened her eyes. What she saw made no sense. Where was she? "There you are," said Sasha, helping her to sit up. 3 popped up behind her. Aunt Jenny closed her eyes while the room settled down and got over its antics. When she opened them, Vrain and Morwenna were there. They were saying something in mid-sentence, mid-explanation. She'd missed something. What were they saying? Something about Vivian? About the sword? "He said she might have to leave, but that she would stay as long as she could," she told them. "What? Who?" "Tom. Dr. Tom. He said—" What was it he'd said? Right. "She'll stay as long as she can, in case we find a way." A way to what? She stopped and thought. "Is she nearby, out there?" asked Vrain. "Yes, not far. The cave, the underwater cave." "Sleeping," he said, she said. There was more. She'd have to go back and ask him what. She woke up aching all over. Sasha was sitting in a chair by her bed with Big Tom curled in her lap and Rudy at her feet. They were in a room that had seen better days. She was hungry, really hungry. "Sasha?" she asked. "Aunt Jenny, you're back." "Was I gone?" "Very, several times. How about you stay with us this time? No more relaying messages?" "Relaying messages? From the dead." "You have the sword." It was hanging from Sasha's weapons belt, hung over the corner of her chair. Morwenna insisted. "She said I'm your good right arm and should carry it." Jenny sat up, scooching back against her pillows. "Where are we?" "The Shattered Isle, about a quarter of the way round from the heart." "How long have we been here?" "I'm not sure. Several days. We can't agree on how many." "Welcome to the Halflands." "You must be hungry. However long it's been, you haven't eaten." "What have you got?" "There's stew in the kitchen. I'll get you some." "Nonsense, my dear. If I've been lying here for days, then it's time I got up." "Are you sure you can?" "Hey, my doctor called me young and healthy at my last checkup. What's a little being stepped on by a dragon?" Aunt Jenny got up, slowly, wrapped herself in a blanket. As she did so, she discovered little Dickens wrapped in its folds and made room for the kitten in the crook of her arm. With Sasha taking her arm, she made her way gingerly out of the kitchen, which turned out to be only a large room with a large fireplace, and not the actual kitchen of the Castle of Glass, in the ruins of which they had taken shelter. The room had once been a drawing room, favored by King Vrain in days gone by. The castle had originally taken its name from the beautiful stained glass windows that had graced many of its rooms. Now the name took on a whole new meaning. She had attacked it mercilessly with both the flaming breath of the great dragon beasts and the magic known as dragonfire, the Halfland's magical equivalent of thermite, napalm, or Greek fire. The heat was so intense in places that sections of the once beautiful castle's walls had turned to slag. The kitchen was still impressive. The 12-foot ceiling was mostly intact, the arching beams that supported it charred and burnt, but still somehow able to do their job. A massive table stood before the fireplace, a stack of boxes and lumber replacing one missing leg. Mismatched chairs salvaged from various rooms were arranged around it, and a couch and love seat were made up as beds. A large cast-iron kettle hung in the fireplace, and from it wafted the scent of heavily spiced food. "Sit here," directed Sasha, "and I'll get you a bowl." As she did so, Morwenna entered the room, followed by the scout. "Aunt Jenny," she said, "'tis good to see you better. Three told me you had risen." "Only from the bed, not the grave," joked Aunt Jenny. "True, though we were concerned for a time. How is everyone?" "I fear me Vrain is taking the loss of the Queen badly, and his health, which was not good, suffers. Sasha and I took minor wounds. Three and Timmins fared best. Have you any further messages from your Tom or Vivian?" "Messages?" "In dreams. You spoke of them in your waking moments." I'm not sure. I had a number of dreams, it seems, of Dr. Tom and you folk mostly. They're all a muddle. I'm sorry." "No apologies necessary," said Sasha, as she handed Aunt Jenny a bowl and spoon and relieved her of little Dickens. She set the kitten on her own shoulder and fetched a bowl of stew for herself as well. "I remember getting the sword from Vivian and noticing my mask had slipped. The vapors were rather awful. I take it that I was badly poisoned?" "Very sick," offered Three. "Three, help with mask. Too late." "Thank you for Three. And Vivian, she slipped back under the water?" Three nodded. "I wonder what's to become of her. Dead, but succumbing to the poison of the Black Heart." "I worry more about Vrain," said Morwenna. "He is still among the living. He will not be consoled, nor brook talk of leaving." "Can we? Have we the ship or boats to travel in?" asked Aunt Jenny. "The Rook is demasted, her boats intact, and the skiff has been repaired." "And why are you asking?" came Vrain's voice from behind Aunt Jenny. He limped slowly into view, looking weaker and sicker than Jenny had yet seen him. "We cannot stay here, your lordship. The vapors are thinner here, but in the air nonetheless. I'll not leave my queen, not here, not poisoned, lost, trapped." Aunt Jenny sighed. "But we have no way to fetch her body." "I gave up my crown, my home, to fish the black and be by her. I'll stay, that she may come to me in dreams. I'll stay till she can be raised. Go if you must. Take the skiff and your folk with you. Here I stay." Sir," she nodded, "perhaps we can get you aid." The king turned his back on her and started to limp to the fireplace. "Sit you, sir," said Timmins. "I'll fetch you a bowl." Vrain sighed and dropped heavily into a worn, overstuffed wingback chair, scowling. And we'll hear more of the aftermath of this adventure next time.